Teenagers go through one of the most difficult psychological times in their whole life. I'm sure a lot of us we all were teenagers, and we experienced some tough times. Now imagine going through this difficult stage of life in a small jail cell with hardened criminals around you. This is the case, unfortunately, for many teenagers today. As you know, there's been laws that try these teenagers in adult court rather than family court, depending on their age and their crimes. I'm here today to propose an alternative to trying these teenagers and wait for them to try. First, I will talk to you about the negative aspects of trying teenagers in adult court. Second, the positive aspects, and then finally, my methods that I believe that should be taken in place. Okay, there are a few good points for those who oppose the idea of teenagers being tried in adult court. With the gun violence rise in schools and teenage violence in general during the 90s, a lot of prosecutors have came down upon teenagers. And in one particular case in Florida, a teenager by the name of Anthony Plaster robbed a total of $2 in lunch money, and he was charged with strong-arm robbery and extortion. And since his family couldn't afford bail, he spent 4 weeks in a prison before his case was dropped. And it was ultimately dropped because he was mentally disabled, and though he was 15, he had the mentality of a 5-year-old. According to CQ researcher, scientific studies that have shown that the brain is not fully developed until the early to mid-20s, and that last portion of the brain to reach full maturity is the frontal lobe governing impulse control. This is a good qualification to show that sometimes these teenagers just aren't physically able to see the mistakes that they have made. There's also some points for those who agree with the idea of children being tried in adult court. As quoted by Miriam Sheehan, the president of Victims of Crime and Leniency, she says, if someone does an adult crime, they are acting as adults, and they have to take responsibility. And of course, unfortunately, teen violence is on the rise, and just the rate of and crimes that these teenagers are committing, from teenager-on-teenager violence between boys and girls, there's cases of teens attacking homeless, and even teenage boys sexually abusing teenage girls. And also the matter of the gun violence in school, which has risen in the 90s and is the cause of a lot of deaths. In a case of Sharif's cousin, he held a man at point blank and shot him in the head in order to rob him in front of his girlfriend. The victim's girlfriend witnessed the murder and testified against the cousin. And in this case, being tried in adult court was truly justified. Along with cousin's case, he is one of the 63 juvenile offenders on death row in prisons around the U.S. So that's a substantial enough amount of teenagers who are committing these heavy crimes. And finally, my system that I propose is a parallel to the 3 strikes law for the life penalty on adults. I believe that teenagers should be tried a few times in their family court depending on the severity of their crime. And finally, if they're not getting the idea that they should not be committing these crimes, they should appear before the adult court. Well, I have outlined the positive and negative aspects of teens being tried in adult court, and I have introduced an alternative. Of course, with things such as these, it must be taken case by case, and depending on the crime committed and the individual, there should be the action taken towards that. Teen violence should not be a topic that is taken lightly. Although it may not affect you personally, its unpredictability can affect those around you before you even notice.
So Joey, what did you think?
I thought the end of her intro was really good. It showed the audience where she's going. And I thought it was really good that she showed both the opponents and the proponents of the trying teens as adults or as juveniles. And her third point of her proposal of what would be a good like happy medium was really good because you seemed really comfortable with it because you knew what you were talking about. And that's it. I thought she had a very good intro, and her third point was pretty strong.
All right, I thought the visualization was okay at the beginning, and your goal is clearly stated. You do kind of drop off your voice in that introduction, and I wasn't even sure I heard the second half of what your proposition was. The secondary issues are labeled clearly, and as you go through it, you do okay job on signposting. I'm not sure that they're automatically the best issues for you to be talking about. There are a couple of questions that come up. As you present it, I know you're trying to be fair to both perspectives, but one of the things that I think is missing here is a demonstration that both perspectives are not being treated fairly. You know, the example that you give us early on about the one guy who being charged with a crime and is in jail for 4 weeks and then released because ultimately they don't decide to pursue it, it's not even demonstrated that that case was one of those situations where somebody was being charged as an adult, and that's why they were in the adult criminal justice system. It probably does fit in that category, but it needs to be a lot clearer. You recognize in the second point that there are cases where this might in fact be necessary to do. So your suggestion is a good one, but what's missing is the information that shows that this is not what is already going on. I doubt very much that prosecutors are taking kids who are caught with a six-pack of beer, throwing them into the prisons and saying, you know, live with it, you ungrateful so-and-so. That's just the way it is. You know, the ones that are being prosecuted are usually the ones that fit into the categories that you're talking about. Violent crimes, you know, that have had multiple contacts with the police before, that sort of thing. So it sounds like you're pretty much arguing for what's going on now, unless there is some reason to believe, for instance, that we go too quickly to prosecuting juveniles as adults, or that we are prosecutors, for instance, sometimes don't see the exceptions, or the judges don't pursue the exceptions, but we don't get any argument about that. I think that's the thing that's missing from the speech that's needed. On presentation issues, at this point in the semester, you need to do a lot less reading in front of the audience, a lot more contact with the audience. So you need to be a lot more animated. You just seem kind of uncertain about what you're doing up there, and this is like the end of everything that we're doing here, and at this point we should be seeing something that's pretty polished, pretty thoroughly prepared. You're engaged with the audience, and I just kind of felt like, well, you had an idea, you've got a paper, and you got to get through it, and that's kind of what you're doing there instead of really, you know, finishing off what we're trying to do during the semester. All right, thank you. Do you have an outline for me? You don't have to staple it or anything. It's okay. Merci. Oh, sorry.